Imagine ruling the world of memory chips for over 3 decades, only to watch that dominance slip away in a matter of years. Samsung Electronics, South Korea's technological pride, once stood unchallenged as the king of memory chips and a rising star in chip manufacturing. Its semiconductors powered smartphones, computers, and servers across the globe, fueling billions in profits. Yet, in 2025, Samsung finds itself in a precarious position, its crown tarnished. The company's stock plummeted, wiping out $122 billion in market value in late 2024. Investors are rattled, and analysts are sounding alarms about Samsung's struggles in the chip war. Why is this tech giant faltering? How did Samsung, a company that once seemed unstoppable, lose ground to rivals like Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company and SK Hynix? Let us dive into the dramatic unraveling of Samsung's semiconductor empire, exploring the technological missteps, lost customers, and fierce competition that have pushed Samsung to the edge. To understand Samsung's current struggles, we need to step back to its origins. Samsung entered the semiconductor business in the 1980s, a bold move for a company then known more for consumer electronics. By the 1990s, Samsung had climbed to the top, becoming the world's leading manufacturer of memory chips, specifically dynamic random access memory and NAND flash. These chips, the backbone of computers and smartphones, became Samsung's golden engine, generating massive profits during tech booms. In the 2010s, the chip division often outshone Samsung's smartphone business, becoming the company's largest profit center. Dynamic random access memory powered the working memory in devices, while NAND flash provided storage for solid-state drives and phones. Samsung's dominance in these areas seemed unassailable, with market shares reaching 40 to 50% for dynamic random access memory and over 30% for NAND flash. But Samsung had bigger ambitions. The company wanted to conquer logic chips, the processors and systems on chip that act as the brains of devices. In the early 2000s, Samsung launched its Foundry division, aiming to manufacture chips for other companies, much like Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. This was no small goal. Samsung announced a staggering 171 trillion won investment, roughly $151 billion, by 2030 to dominate both memory and foundry markets. The plan, dubbed Vision 2030, aimed to topple Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company and solidify Samsung's memory lead. For a time, success seemed within reach. Samsung scored major clients like Apple, Qualcomm, and Nvidia, manufacturing chips for iPhones, Snapdragon processors, and GeForce graphics cards. By the late 2010s, Samsung was the second largest foundry globally, trailing only Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, while holding the #1 spot in memory. The future looked bright, but cracks were forming beneath the surface. Samsung's foundry ambitions were bold, but the reality proved brutal. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, the world's leading pure-play foundry, serves tech giants like Apple, Nvidia, and advanced micro devices. By 2025, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company controlled 67% of the global foundry market, while Samsung's share dwindled to just 7.7%, down from 8.1% the previous quarter and a high of 15% years earlier. China's Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corporation, with a 6% share, was closing in fast, threatening Samsung's distant second-place position. How did Samsung fall so far behind? The first blow came from technology and yield struggles. Chip manufacturing is a high-stakes game where yields, the percentage of functional chips per wafer, determine success. Samsung made headlines by adopting extreme ultraviolet lithography for 7nm chips in 2018, beating Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company to the punch. In 2022, Samsung pioneered gate-all-around transistor architecture for its 3nm process, another industry first. Gate-all-around, unlike the older FinFET design, surrounds the transistor channel on all sides, reducing leakage and boosting efficiency at tiny scales. On paper, Samsung was ahead. But in practice, yields were abysmal. Reports in 2024 revealed that Samsung's 3nm yields were so low that even its own Exynos 2500 chip, intended for Galaxy smartphones, faced production doubts. If Samsung could not produce reliable chips for itself, why would external clients trust the company? Compare this to Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. Their 3nm process, launched later but built on proven FinFET technology, achieved strong yields, powering 26% of Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company's wafer sales by late 2024, largely thanks to Apple's iPhone chips. Samsung's 3nm process, despite its early start, had no major commercial customers. Low yields meant fewer sellable chips, and with factories costing tens of billions to build, poor yields spelled financial disaster. Samsung's Foundry and Logic Design Unit reportedly lost 500 billion won, about $385 million, in the third quarter of 2024 alone. In a shocking move, Samsung even delayed installing new extreme ultraviolet lithography machines in its upcoming Texas factory due to insufficient customer orders. This was a stark admission. Samsung's Foundry was struggling to fill its factories. Yields were not the only problem. Samsung's Foundry lost key customers, a blow that widened the gap with Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. In 2015, Samsung manufactured Apple's A9 chips for iPhones, sharing the order with Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. But after that, Apple shifted entirely to Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, citing better yields and power efficiency. Qualcomm, another major client, used Samsung's 14nm and 10nm processes for Snapdragon processors in 2016, but by 2022, Qualcomm moved its flagship Snapdragon 8 series to Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company after Samsung's 4nm chips suffered thermal issues. NVIDIA, which used Samsung's 8nm process for its GeForce RTX 3000 graphics cards in 2020, returned to Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company for newer chips, especially for AI accelerators where performance is critical. Advanced Micro Devices remained loyal to Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company for its processors and graphics cards. The result? Samsung's Foundry sales fell to $2.893 billion in the first quarter of 2025, an 11% drop from the previous quarter, while Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company's revenue soared with high-volume orders. Why did these tech giants abandon Samsung? Trust played a major role. Unlike Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, a pure-play foundry that only manufactures chips, Samsung is a vertically integrated giant. The company designs its own chips through its System Large-Scale Integration division, producing Exynos processors and image sensors, and sells consumer products like smartphones and televisions. For clients like Apple or Qualcomm, this raises a red flag. Sharing cutting-edge chip designs with Samsung risks intellectual property leaks to Samsung's design teams or consumer divisions. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, with no competing products, has built a reputation for secrecy and reliability. Despite Samsung's assurances of internal firewalls, the perception of a conflict of interest persists. In May 2025, rumors surfaced that Samsung might spin off its Foundry business, possibly listing it independently in the United States to address these concerns and raise capital. While speculative, this idea highlights the severity of Samsung's trust gap. If Samsung's Foundry struggles were surprising, the company's loss of its memory crown was seismic. For over 30 years, Samsung led the world in memory chip sales, dominating dynamic random access memory and NAND flash. But in the first quarter of 2025, SK Hynix, another South Korean company, overtook Samsung to become the largest dynamic random access memory vendor by revenue, capturing 36% of the market compared to Samsung's 34%. Micron, based in the United States, trailed at 25%. This was the first time in decades that Samsung lost its top spot, a stunning shift in the chip landscape. The culprit? High bandwidth memory, a specialized type of dynamic random access memory critical for artificial intelligence workloads. High bandwidth memory stacks memory layers vertically, connected by tiny wires, allowing massive data throughput for artificial intelligence chips like NVIDIA's A100 and H100 graphics processing units. In 2024, the artificial intelligence boom drove explosive demand for high bandwidth memory, and SK hynix was ready. The company, which pioneered high bandwidth memory in 2013, held a commanding 70% market share by 2025, supplying NVIDIA and other artificial intelligence players. SK hynix's 5th-generation high-bandwidth memory 3E chips were in high demand, and the company was already developing high-bandwidth memory 4. The result was a record $7 trillion operating profit for SK hynix in the third quarter of 2024, a stark contrast to Samsung's struggles. Samsung, meanwhile, faltered. The company produced earlier high-bandwidth memory versions but lagged in delivering high-bandwidth memory 3 and 3E. Delays in ramping up production meant Samsung missed the 2023-2024 artificial intelligence boom. A Reuters report noted that Samsung's hopes of supplying NVIDIA with high-bandwidth memory were dashed by delays, as SK hynix secured major contracts after Samsung's chips failed NVIDIA's tests due to heat and power consumption issues. Micron also gained ground, leaving Samsung a distant third in this critical segment. While Samsung remained strong in commodity dynamic random access memory and NAND flash, leading in innovations like 128-layer and 200-layer 3D NAND, the high-value high-bandwidth memory market was slipping away. The company's slower pivot to artificial intelligence-driven memory costed dearly. Samsung's woes were not just technical or competitive. Geopolitical tensions, particularly United States export restrictions on advanced chips to China, hit Samsung hard. China accounts for a significant portion of Samsung's chip sales, including 20% of its high-bandwidth memory market. In 2025, tightened United States restrictions forced inventory adjustments and reduced factory utilization, contributing to a 56% profit drop in the second quarter, with operating profit falling to 4.6 trillion won, or $3.36 billion. This was Samsung's lowest quarterly profit in 6 quarters, a sharp decline from 10.4 trillion won the previous year. The strong $1 exchange rate further eroded earnings, while Chinese competitors like Chongshin Memory Technologies and Huawei ramped up high-bandwidth memory production, eating into Samsung's share. The memory chip market's cyclical nature added to Samsung's pain. In 2022-2023, a post-pandemic chip glut led to oversupply and crashing prices. Samsung, unlike SK hynix and Micron, delayed cutting production, hoping to outlast rivals with its financial muscle. This backfired, resulting in historic losses, the worst since 2009, and ballooning inventories. By late 2023, artificial intelligence demand revived the memory market, but Samsung was caught unprepared, lacking sufficient high-bandwidth memory supply. SK hynix, having cut production earlier, capitalized on the rebound, particularly in high-bandwidth memory, which, despite being a small portion of total bits, commands high prices and drove SK hynix's revenue lead. Samsung is not standing still. The company continues to invest heavily, with a new factory in Taylor, Texas, targeting 2-nanometer production by 2026. Early reports suggest Samsung's 2-nanometer process, called SF2, is showing promise, with trial yields of 20 to 30%. If Samsung can achieve competitive yields, this could attract customers looking to diversify from Taiwan's semiconductor manufacturing company, especially amid geopolitical concerns over Taiwan. Samsung is also pouring 48 trillion won, about $34.8 billion, into artificial intelligence memory facilities in 2025, focusing on high-bandwidth memory 4 in collaboration with Taiwan's semiconductor manufacturing company. Additionally, Samsung and SK Hynix delayed phasing out older DDR4 memory to 2026 due to a shortage and price surge, as high-bandwidth memory production strained wafer supply. Yet, the road ahead is daunting. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company's dominance, SK Hynix's high-bandwidth memory lead, and rising competition from China's Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corporation and others leave Samsung squeezed. The company's foundry losses, customer trust issues, and memory market missteps have exposed vulnerabilities. In May 2025, Samsung replaced its semiconductor division chief to address the chip crisis, and leadership shakeups continue. Analysts estimate Samsung lost over $4 trillion in foundry operations in the first half of 2025, with an operating margin of just 4.4%, the lowest in 15 years. Professor Lee Jong-won of Sangmyung University, quoted in a 2025 article, summed it up: Samsung's foundry is in a tight spot. It needs to step up its design and tech game and focus more on what customers want. Samsung's semiconductor empire, once a symbol of innovation and dominance, faces its toughest test. The company's early technological leaps, like 3-nanometer gate-all-around and extreme ultraviolet lithography, were not enough to overcome yield issues and customer defections. In memory, Samsung's failure to lead in high-bandwidth memory allowed SK Hynix to claim the throne, while geopolitical pressures and market cycles deepened the wounds. Samsung's $122 billion market value loss in 2024 and profit plunges in 2025 are stark reminders of how quickly fortunes can shift in the chip war. Yet, with massive investments, new factories, and a focus on next-generation technologies like 2-nanometer chips and high-bandwidth memory 4, Samsung is not out of the fight. The question is whether the company can rebuild trust, refine its technology, and seize the artificial intelligence-driven future before rivals pull further ahead. The chip war is far from over, but for Samsung, the battle to reclaim its crown has never been fiercer.